Okay, team, we are underway. Welcome to a beautiful Wednesday evening in Tamiro as I stand in my office up here looking out at green grass at the end of February, which is a little bit of a shock, but we will take it. So, running through tonight, thanks everyone for jumping on. We've got Aslan here from Open Country Dairy who will jump in a little bit later. There he is, if you can see him waving out. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through, I'll run through some sort of key things around broader project planning. And then we're going to hand over to Aslan, who's got sort of 10 and 15 minutes of running through the Open Country Dairy promotion around the co-funding that they're offering. So good opportunity to check in with all of that as well. So if there's anything awry, if I've just recently turned 40, so technologically a little bit challenged, much prefer to be standing in a paddock planting trees or out in the nursery. So if you can't hear me, I look sideways. I'm not standing in frame or anything, just sing out. As we go along, plenty of opportunity to ask questions. So just hit me up. I love it as we go. If you're like, hey, Adam, that seems a bit silly, mate. Why do you do this? There's a really good opportunity for us to answer those. I'll try and get to them as we go. But if I don't, I'll definitely at the end come through and answer everything. So that is all good. So feel free to use the Q&A or the chat and just fire in questions as you go. We've got Devin in the background pushing the buttons tonight, making all the magic happen. So away we go. This is where Devon's going to push a button and the webinar's going to start while the slideshow will start. Okay, so a few key things we're going to run through. So site identification, obviously looking on farm, where we're going to plant and why. We'll talk through co-funding in a more broader sense for a start. Then we'll look at preparation and weed control, which is very apparent now as we're just sort of on the eve of autumn, getting all the summer weeds under control. We'll look at methods of planting, spade versus auger. We'll look at spring releases and enrichment planting, and then we're sort of going to go into more of the open country funding piece from there, which is awesome. Now, who am I? So not wearing pink shorts tonight, just got the regulation Canterbury stubbies on, but I'm that bloke with not much hair and a beard and a massive love for trees, especially getting practical solutions out on farms. So I farm here just under 100 hectares myself at Cambridge, which run beef, and obviously it's home to the nursery, and really passionate about conservation, not just locally, but across New Zealand, involved in a couple of conservation projects. So yeah, that's me. A couple of kids running through the next generation, breeding up some more tree enthusiasts. But these are the real heroes. This is our team. Diverse bunch of folk that we are, and there's about another 3 or 4 to add to that list now as we sort of continue to grow. But yeah, just a cool bunch of people who are really passionate about getting out and doing practical things to help getting native trees out in the landscape. So we grow a bunch of trees, and we sort of like more or less a tree for every budget, a tree for every place. We're not wedded to one particular size or grade. We will supply trees, we will plant trees, we'll do maintenance, we'll do site prep. We kind of anything to help make a native planting project a success, that's what we help with. So for some people, that's everything. For some people, we just supply a plant or we just do a bit of planting and maintenance. Yeah, we're here to help all across the Waikato Bay of Plenty. And we ship trees all over the North Island. Sorry, shutting the window. So that's enough about us. Let's have a look at getting on and planning your planting project. Fire me questions as we go, but basically, number one, identifying a site. So we've got 3 examples there of areas that you would be looking to plant trees. So the top one, we're looking across a stream into a little bit of an area that catches a bit of flood, and it's a boggy area. Farmer actually had looked at that area at draining it, putting some overflow in, not successful, not suitable, just how it was. So they said, hey, look, no worries, wet area, we'll put a fence around it, establish a beautiful wetland, and along with some other work they've done on farm, it's a really awesome look. The second one there is, second photo there is we're looking at steep faces. So this is a really interesting sort of river terrace farm. So beautiful flats and then real steep faces in between. So working on a long-term project there, planning out those steep areas. They're erosion prone. Cattle on those faces just don't work. So obvious obvious areas to take out of farming, not worth putting the fertiliser on and causing all that sediment and nutrient runoff as well. Next one down there, similar-ish to the top one, but it's a classic sort of little bit of a gully down to a wet area in the bottom. Like typical on many farms, especially if you've got rolling country, you're going to have these little folds. So it's just sort of identifying, for me, it's the why are we doing it, and finding where is that harmonious line between productive farming and giving something back to nature. So we'll go through to the next. So this is a good example of sort of right tree, right place. Now, what that is different things thrive in different parts of the landscape. So up on those high edges, you've got your dry-loving trees, your kānuka, your mānuka to an extent, but aki, tōtara, things that don't mind a bit of dry feet and actually go really well in that area. As you come through into that sort of mid-range, you're more in your pittosporums and your broadleaf shrubs. Then you come down to those wet edges, you're putting in, your flaxes sort of back from the water, and then as you get closer to the water, it's, your toitois, your sedges and stuff. So, and then right in that water, you can actually have reeds and other things, depending on sort of how hard out you're looking to go. But it's important that you don't just go and buy trees that you like, or go, oh, love flaxes, put them everywhere. But don't think about how they're going to look in that sort of 10, 20 years time. So getting the right layout over a site is really important. It's something we really train into our team quite hard. They're really passionate about making sure that they're creating a layout across a site that is sympathetic with nature, not just the standard mix of plants that we think should cookie cutter across everywhere. So this is a good sort of little graphic that we share to give you a bit of an idea of how that looks. So species and the mix of species. So this is an interesting one because not every tree can you put in straight away. Like you might want a rimu forest, and I reckon every year I get a dozen people emailing me going, I just want a rimu forest, Adam, or I just want this single one thing to be here. But things like a rimu tree, for example, like to grow up in under shade and take a long time to actually then push through in that sort of shade and shelter to become beautiful big trees. So we can't just chuck them onto a bare hillside. We've got to focus on those colonising species. So that's where we talk about, you hear people talk about pioneering species. We call them first generation colonisers, colonising species. So mānuka, kānuka, cabbage trees, flaxes, these sorts of things that they grow well in that sort of open environment. And then they are basically building up and creating cover so that the enrichment species, those things that can come in once there's a bit of shade and shelter, we're talking here about, kakatea and rewa, tōtara, these things that they're going to be trees that live forever. Because what a lot of people don't know is like something like mānuka, beautiful, aggressive growth, hardy as anything, but it's a tree that really only lives for 20, 25 years, depending on where you are. Now, you can't just plant mānuka and hope for the best. We actually need to work with nature. There's got to be something to come through that shade and shelter of the mānuka and create a big, beautiful forest after that. So it's about a mix of species and how we sort of integrate that to create a forest in the long term. So important to think about that when planning, that the species mix suits your site. Density. So density and plant size. These are really fascinating things. Plant density is often dictated by budget. It's often dictated by funding. There's a big thing going around at the moment with regional council that is hill country erosion funding, which is sort of the main lever to pull for councils at the moment in terms of providing funding to people. The problem that has is it's generally funded for 1,600 stems a hectare, which is 2.5 metre spacings. That's totally fine on large-scale hill country. You will get a canopy cover, but after about 10 years, maybe longer on some sites. So you've got 10 years of risk of higher losses because things are more exposed. You've got weed burden. You've got the visual aspect of it. So these are all things to consider. In an ideal world, on farm, when you're planting sort of fertile areas, high visual areas, you'd be putting in plants in at about 1.5 metre spacings, about 4,500 stems a hectare, and that's going to give you canopy cover in about 3 years. So trees touching in about 3 years, a really good density, but obviously it's an extra nearly 3,000 plants per hectare to achieve that. The reality is you get what you pay for. The more plants you put in, you're going to get a better result, quicker, better survival, and better overall growth. But on a lower budget, there is an option to go wider. You've got to select your species wise in terms of the ones that will survive in that area, and let that sort of regeneration take place over a longer period of time. The other thing there, plant size. So this also is going to impact your cost. Look, we've sort of worked out that a half litre or a 28 cell plant for most revegetation species is your lowest cost to canopy cover. So trees that survive through to creating canopy cover the quickest, they're a good size in terms of economic around a nursery to grow, so you can grow them reasonably cheap. They're reasonably easy to plant, so therefore your cost of establishing them is relatively cheap. They need a little bit more in terms of maintenance than a larger plant, but the cost of that maintenance doesn't outweigh the cost of the planting and growing labour for a larger tree. So generally that's optimum. We plant some that are a little bit smaller, especially in that large scale stuff, when it's just things like Manuka and Kanuka. And we do plant in bigger grades. We do a lot of 1 litre grades, and some even bigger grades again. And that's really often species or site dependent. If you want instant impact, pay for the larger plant. If you have some species that are a bit sensitive, you might put them in a bit larger, but put them in a little bit later after a canopy's established. So it's all about adapting to your site and budget, but those are two big drivers of it. And we go to the next one. Co-funding supports. That's what we're here for. We're going to hear about all the amazing things that Open Country are doing. But obviously, for most of the trees that we plant, there is some degree of support of co-funding out there. There are some contestable funds. There are your regional council who are your absolute go-to, generally will support things. And then obviously dairy companies, Open Country, and the others that we're not talking about tonight, who do have various plans for supporting you for funding plants. So some of those are per plant costs, or it might just be an upfront single grant. Some local councils also have funds that they contribute as well. So I think it's just a case of, again, depending on where you are, what your project is, we can recommend the co-funders to get in touch with. And that's really our job, is to help you connect with them, so that we can, basically make it easy for you at the other end. Cool. Site prep and weed control. So this is bang on right at the moment. We're in that crossover between dealing with these ugly things, these summer weeds, the nasty four there, convolvulus and climbing things, blackberry, gorse, they're common problems in planting. And again, it's site specific. If you're planting a rough hillside, convolvulus unlikely to be an issue. It really loves fertile ground, but you're more likely to have gorse and potentially blackberry in it. So it's identifying what's on your site and not rushing to plant. That weed control in the summer before planting is really important. But for example, I was on a site today, covered it's out of pine trees. There's just the ground is thick with gorse seedlings, and privet there as well. And we've talked about, hey, look, we're going to get a helicopter spray in, and then we're going to reassess it in May and see how it's looking. But quite likely, we're going to wind up with another season of weed control in there before we actually look at planting it. There's no point rushing in to plant, because these climbing weeds, especially, you're going to climb over top of your plants, and you just don't have the same chemical control available to you to control those weeds once those plants are in. So beforehand, that's really key, is basically getting in and controlling. So that's this time of the year. As part of your planning, you should be looking at, hey, what weed burdens do we have and how we can control them. So that is the number one thing. Pre-spraying. Now, this is an interesting one. Some people get very religious and say, absolutely not. I do not believe in pre-spraying. And other people say, no, you must pre-spray. Again, every site's different. We are big believers in pre-spray. And the reason why that is, basically giving your plant the best chance to establish. It's got no competition. It's just there. It's ready to go. The other thing that we do with the pre-spray is we use a long-acting herbicide called Turb. And that keeps that ground free of weeds and germinating grasses for a lot longer. And that means in the spring, your plant isn't getting immediately rushed over with grass. So it's going to establish itself and grow a lot better. So we're a big believer in pre-spraying to just help those plants get off to the best start. and tying it in with a release spray to ensure that you're removing competition for that start of its life. Some people, like some sites, some people have had success other ways, but this is sort of a way that we can ensure that we've got a process to get a really good result. So for us, pre-spraying really important, but again, hey, if you've got other ideas, I'm always happy to hear them. So the site I was at today, they actually planted really dense relative monoculture, well, so just Manuka, Kanuka, Totara. They didn't release, and actually it's come up really well. So, but then 99% of the other sites we've seen that haven't been pre-sprayed or released, you've got losses, up to 50%. So it's pretty challenging in that sense. Excuse me while I drink. Now, planting techniques. Some people, again, will only plant with a spade, others will only plant with an auger. Like whatever suits best, and they have pros and cons. We do probably 90% of our planting with augers. We're generally into relatively fertile, soft ground. Now, they also work because we have a balance of team. We don't just have a bunch of big, brawny men banging trees in the ground. We've got, big, small men and women. And what we actually find is that we auger a hole, sets the tone for the planting site really well. And then often the girls in our team are coming through planting, and they're a bit more on the finesse and making sure it's planted really well. So it fits with the way that we do that. There are some benefits. So when you're augering, you loosen a lot more soil in the hole, and that means you reduce transplant shock, because as that plant goes in, its roots are straight into that soft soil, and that tree's racing away. The spade, on the other hand, nice and simple. We've all got one in the shed, so pretty straightforward. There are some videos on our YouTube where I actually just go through planting with either a spade or an auger. If you get your technique right with the spade, you can loosen enough soil, then you can get them in really well. What we see for a lot of sort of, I'd say amateurs, probably the words are amateur planters who don't do much of it or haven't done much of it, and we find this especially in community planting days we're involved with, is that they often don't plant the tree deep enough. You ideally want to have it planted just below where the nursery soil was on it. And then that it's actually firm in the ground. Often with a spade, if you're digging a hole, you don't quite dig it deep enough, and people try and make it fit, and it doesn't always work. So there's pros and cons to both. But yeah, there's some key things you need to follow, and I'd suggest jumping on our YouTube and having a quick look at those things as I cover them off. Spring release. So I talk about the pre-spray, and this release is hugely important in my opinion. Probably one of the single biggest things you can do to impact the survival rate and the survival of your plants. In a growthy summer like we've had, we've been out there in the summer, and we actually still are on some sites going back and spraying for a second time to basically keep all that real vegetative growth off from around your plant. And really what this is about, we could call it a release, but it's really, it's about that point in the spring where you've got that real leafy grass coming up around your plant, and we come through, move that grass away, spray around, kill that, lay it down. You've got the sort of compost layer around your plant. And then that plant's away. It's not having that competition through that strong growthy period. Its roots are sucking up all that nutrient and moisture in the soil. And it's not got the competition. It's not getting dragged over by grass. This would be the number one thing that I think people let slide, especially in sort of people planting their own trees. It's really hard. Often that time that it needs releasing is the same time on farm when people are mating, they're making silage, they're putting crops in, and if you miss your release by a couple of weeks, you can have all your plants over top. They're hard to find. And you just don't get them back. So some hardy ones will survive and push through it, but those more susceptible species, they won't make it, and the other ones just won't thrive in the same way. So really important to go through that. Again, we've got videos on our YouTube where we can sort of talk through the how-to on that. Then, of course, it's a service we offer as well. So, but yeah, when you look at that photo, you can see hard to find where that tree is amongst that grass. This is an interesting one, and I love these. I always come at me with some feedback, but I love these things because there's so many different ways of doing it. How big are your trees? How far do you put them apart? Which species, etc. We are very open. We do things very different ways for different sites. And this idea of a manual release, where people talk about coming and sort of, pulling the plants away, especially by people who aren't into herbicides, it's popular, and it has a place. We've also got people who trim up around their trees with a weed eater, get the grass away. We use primarily a spray release, and the reason for is that that's the most economical way to achieve that sort of protection of the tree and to get that grass out of the way from impeding its growth. At the same time, we do actually come to that tree, and if the grass is growing up high, we'll either get on our hands and pull it apart, or we'll stomp it around with our foot and then give it a spray if it's actually growing over it. The problem is with a manual release, if the grass especially is in that real vegetative growthy stage, and you pull it away, 2 weeks later it's going to be back over that tree again, which is again fine if you've got the time to go and do it. But we're trying to do that in an economical manner, that providing that service so that it's actually knocked down and it can stay down. It's a different story if the grass has gone to seed and it's a bit harder. You can actually bend that, break it, stomp it, and it's not going to come back and rush through in the same way. But that's more applicable in that sort of Christmas time onwards, as we sort of know on site. The other challenge that we get a little bit in terms of timing with the release, and we're seeing that a bit this summer, is you get summer grasses that just grow so quick, and things like paspalum that can rush through. You can spray it, and then a month later it's actually blowing out again in terms of growth. So yes, different ways of doing it, but ultimately from our point of view, a spray ensures that you've got dead grass and your tree is safe. Now, not long for me to go, and then it's going to come in and talk about this funding. So we talk about enrichment planting. So this is sort of post year one. So year one is all about prep, plant, release, get it established well. Then we're going to try and produce a canopy. We've got those pioneers establishing, and then we're going to enrich them. So we're going to come through and put those long-lived species that are going to grow larger, and they want the shade and shelter. So that's coming back in, years 2, 3, 4, 5, perhaps, at some point in there, and going, great. We actually do want to introduce some tawa or some rimu or some miro in here, those sort of more sensitive trees, but are, epic trees. And then once you've got that full sort of forest, they start to come out the top, and that's that sort of 10, 15, 20 years where the big trees start to emerge at the top of your manuka and pittosporums. And that's when you've got this amazing forest, like the stuff that is sort of remnant around. So it's kind of, year one gets you 90% of the way. But you can have a lot of fun with your planting if you sort of keep at it, keep fiddling around the edges. A forest is a real living thing. Plants will live and die. Some will do better than others. And then, by adding little bits and pieces to it, you can really make something completely magic. So, yeah, it's something I get fired up about, is doing these little bits and pieces as well. Okay, so this is where Aslan's going to come in and take over from me, and he's going to be far more interesting because he's got money to give to people. So it's got to be more exciting. So I'll check you out into the background and hand over to you, Aslan.
Yeah, and even better than that, Adam, it's not my money, so I can be free and easy.
Hey, give it to everyone. I love it.
There are some caveats, and I'll explain what they look like in a little bit. But just first and foremost, to say thank you for the opportunity to chat to you guys tonight, and for Restore Native for the opportunity as well. A couple of, or just at least a footnote before I get started. I'm in the midst of flood recovery stuff down here in Canterbury. So the last week for me has been absolutely massive. I'm a little bit unshaven. I'm a little bit grayer than I was this time a week ago out there. So my wife's business has been hit pretty hard. So if words are not coming, then that will give you an indication of the just the hours that I've been pulling over the last week or so. A little bit about me before we jump into the program itself. So I've been at Open Country for coming up 18 months now. The role is Head of Sustainable Initiatives, and I work closely with farmers, indirectly with farmers, rather. I work closely with customers, and particularly those that are more interested in the sustainability space. And I do quite a lot of work for my sins in the regulatory space as well, just to make sure that farmer efforts are recognised, putting a tree in the ground is a big component of that, and a strong push from us and others, in fact, in this space. Adam started with, I just jotted it down, and I think you said, make a planting project, make a planting project a success. And that's kind of paramount. Like funding will get you so far, but part of the reason that this is what we call a partnership is that it's a partnership in terms of Open Country becomes a conduit for funds that are increasingly available from offshore, and it's a partnership with your nursery, not just Restore Native, although they do an amazing job and have supported this program really, really well. The program exists to essentially transform less productive land into a long-term environmental value. There's multiple benefits you guys will be well aware, from carbon capture and sequestration through to biodiversity, through to erosion control. What I should have put on there is water quality as well is a massive one, particularly if you're targeting those critical source areas or those riparian margins. The program is, and to be, just putting all cards on the table, the funding comes from Nestlé. Nestlé don't do this out of the goodness of their heart only. They're doing it there's a sort of return on investment for them. They've got net zero commitments around 2050, and so they're contributing and putting funds into programs such as this and others. But Open Country will happily ride the coattails there in terms of promotion and in terms of the kind of the social license that comes with supporting farmers by operating as a conduit for those funds. So next slide, please, Devon. In a nutshell, this is what it looks like. So it's a 50% funding opportunity that covers. We need to put an indicative value in there, and that value is a little bit out of date since the program was set up in 2021. So that is to say that that's an indicative. We've got some flexibility. Adam mentioned that every site is different. We completely understand that. The funds can be used for that pre-work, for the planting, to support the cost of planting itself, for the purchase of the tree itself, and then for post-maintenance work as well. Again, it's making that planting project a success, and we recognise that those funds need to go across those things. So for every tree planted, a second is funded, and that's that kind of Nestlé is looking for additionality around this. You can frame it multiple ways, so twice as many plants or half the cost, however you want to put that. It's pretty loose in terms of what it covers. It needs to be on either the dairy platform or support block is fine, so long as there's a connection there to the production, that's fine. But generally what we're finding is that that's sitting in across less productive areas of the farm. From a productivity perspective, productive areas from a waterways perspective, soil resilience, shelter and shade, and long-term land value. As I mentioned earlier, it is a partnership with your local nursery, and I've talked a little bit about the locations there. Next slide, please, Don. Open, as you might imagine, to Open Country suppliers. Other mill processors run similar programs, so obviously we need to dovetail it into ours, but I know that others, and Adam talked about some of the other funding opportunities. Not unheard of for farmers to combine funding opportunities as well. So at times we'll work with regional council, and that's fine. It just needs to be a clear delineation. There's an expectation and a commitment required for continued supply that just recognises the admin and the support that goes into it. The project has a cap on total number of trees. That's essentially generated by total number of funds available. But we've got funds likely available for at least the next 2 years, is what it's looking like at the moment, and especially for this year. It's only for permanent plantings. There's a requirement that they're fenced off. funding doesn't cover that, just so we're clear. And it only covers the larger specimens, given that there's a focus on sequestration, the benefits that brings. Next slide, please. As I've mentioned, native trees with woody stems. Adam's already touched on some of the examples there. Some of the other examples in those zone, I think you call it the near stream zone, I think, are those smaller non-woody species, such as caryxes and flaxes. But I think Adam has entirely appropriately sung the virtues of working with a nursery to ensure that we've got the right tree going in the right place. Next slide, please. It's about now where applications come in. There's a little bit of paperwork that goes with it. It's not much. It's a relatively pain-free application and submission on that. So we just need to know the area and an estimate of nursery costs. It doesn't have to be exact, and you won't be held to account on that, but we do need that indicative value. That just allows us to manage the overall funds. Loosely, applications close at the end of March. Mainly that's just to ensure, as Adam said, that these things are not rushed. There's enough time and process that goes in ahead. Normally planting from May to September. Because it's tied up with a larger program, there is a requirement for a verification visit. So QCons does that. There's no cost to that. The program covers the cost of that. Invoices are submitted at the end of the year, and rebate comes through generally about December, January the following year. There's a requirement for paying those costs up front. Open Country then provides that reimbursement via Nestlé. Next slide, please. Quality specimens. Adam, essentially, I like the way that you put it, Adam, in terms of you get what you pay for. So within the realms of budget, work to the best quality possible. And take your time. Essentially, what that last bullet there just refers to an expectation around mortality, hence the three previous bullets on that page. There's a requirement there if greater than 5% mortality that replanting is required. Next slide, please. This is an interesting one and potentially sort of can be a bit off-putting to people. My view is that it shouldn't. So in terms of how the program works, I mentioned right at the start that Nestlé are not in this for shits and giggles, right? That they are doing this very, very deliberately to contribute to the bottom line of their net zero 2050 ambitions. Okay, so with that, Nestlé receive the carbon benefits associated with those trees that go into the ground. We've worked hard, and this reflects a kind of a process and involvement and keeping very, very close to policy. And in particular, a number of years ago now, there was a kind of a process called He Waka Eke Noa, and that was essentially a process that aimed to encourage reduction of emissions through charging essentially a tax, for want of a better term. The way that process worked was that or at least they were intending it to work. It hasn't landed, and there's nothing on the cards. The conversation won't be revisited until at least 2030, unless we see a change of government. The way the process, however, was considered and was being developed was that there was a cost associated with methane emissions. There was a cost associated, a dollar value that is associated with nitrous oxide emissions. And there was a negative cost, or a benefit, if you like, associated with sequestration. So A plus B minus C was the process that was being built, if you like, in order to understand what that cost was likely to be on farm. The program that we've developed ensures that if something like that comes back into force, then farmers 100% eligible for those benefits. So there's a kind of not so subtle, but they call it vertical claims policy. I won't bore you with all of the details, but needless to say, there won't be there's no penalising for farmers if something like that was to come into play in New Zealand. If you were thinking of using the same trees for carbon benefits, then that's so the emissions trading scheme, for example, you cannot. That would be double counting to use these trees. Next slide, please. Just a couple more before I wrap up, Adam. Program started in 2022. Over the course of that period, it was coming up near 250,000 plants in the ground. Estimated sequestration for that is about 800 tonnes. To give you an indication, we do have a sort of a indicative minimum number of trees, and it's just that there's a degree of admin associated with this, so just to make it worthwhile. So that sort of sits relatively low in that sort of around that 300 zone. Plantings, around 100 zone. Plantings are ranged from 225 right up to close to 20,000 plants at a Waikato farm. Median is 804. Next slide, please. So I'm at risk of repeating myself and going on for a bit long. 50% funding. Supports that wider farm and sustainability outcomes. I think I've been very clear that where that funding comes from, Open Country doesn't get anything out of this. We just operate as a kind of a middleman, for want of a better term. Similar applications and protection should a future Iwaka Ekanoa come in, and just make sure you get those funds in. I think the next slide is the last one, which is just a note there in terms of if you've got any questions, Adam, I can pass on a frequently asked questions handout, and just a bit of other additional information if there's any interest. But actually, just email environment@opencountry.co.nz, and we'll fire that through to you. Stephen, that's me. Adam, I'm done now. Happy to answer questions.
Yeah, if anyone's got any questions for us in there, this is a great time for it. Otherwise, I can attest he is responsive on email and actually bloody helpful. So thank you.
Not after I've been on a shovel. So what you forgot to mention there, Adam, is what's the kind of the fertility of floodwater silt to support tree planting.
Not significant. But this is why we're all doing the part up in the hills to hopefully try and protect some of that erosion, which is kind of a jam. Okay, we got a few little things to wrap up, and then any questions, and I think Aslan will hang around if there are any for him at the end. We're only going to be a couple of minutes away from hanging out, so if you've got anything, now's the time to bang it in the chat or the Q&A. Next webinar, so that is not the topic of our... Oh, no, it is. Yes, understanding co-funding. That is the next webinar coming up. So that is a bit more, we dive a bit deeper into things like Waikato Regional Council funding, Waikato River Authority, and a number of other things. So that's coming up in April. So we run broadly a webinar every 6 weeks. And yeah, we cover off topics that sort of come to us, and this has been sort of a big one in this part of the season. There's lots of questions around co-funding, so I don't think we've got any questions. That either means
Adam, can I be as bold to ask one in that case?
Go.
In terms of, I know you've talked a lot about, every site is different, and all of that sort of stuff, and we've been quite clear and deliberate with Nestlé to ensure that funding is available post trees in the ground. It's not just a sort of a, do it once and walk away scenario. Can you give us sort of an indication of averages or whatever? But are we talking 1 year? Are we talking in terms of that release, that post planting release? Is it an annual thing? Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? What are we talking here?
It's a great question. Gosh, I really sound like Winston Peters when I say every site's different because it's very political. But the reality is, I reckon 50% of our sites will get away with a single spring release, and then they'll be away and they'll be fine. I would say for the first 2 years at least, every release will benefit the planting area. But often not, it won't make economical sense to go back in, say, 2 years' time and release grass from around larger trees, even though they'll get a better growth and you might save 1 or 2 trees from getting smothered. But the cost of actually doing the release is economical versus the impact it has. In a summer like this, we would have done a second release on probably over half of the plantings that we did. So we're back in for that second release, but obviously we're a little bit out of the box to have so much growth through January and February. And then what we are looking at is where you've got those really growthy riparian type plantings that we know are going to have extra growth, we'll follow up and we'll make sure it's getting a summer autumn release, and we'll check back on it next spring. And often what we do is we'll actually just have a walk through and just target the plants that need the extra weed control, or vegetation control around them. If something's sort of up to your shoulder height, no grass is going to get it, so we don't bother. But yeah, certainly, we talk about the WRA funding, Waikato River Authority. They fund, I think they're talking about 4 releases, might be 5 releases. So it's sort of like up to 3 years of maintenance, which is absolute gold standard. But like I say, it's a diminishing returns in terms of cost invested versus benefit to the planting in those subsequent years.
Oh, so and what about pests? What's the, is there some rule of thumb? Around that?
Everywhere has different pests. I know sort of up the back of where we are here at Te Miro, deer are a real problem, and therefore there are some species which just get targeted by the deer that we just do not plant. And so for us, it's kind of we start to know what gets impacted in various areas. The goats present, are there, the deer present, is it major hares and rabbits? And also just talking to the farmer, like every farmer knows their own area and their own particular pest pressures. Very much most times we're suggesting a decent sort of spotlight shoot before we plant to not bump a few hares and rabbits on the head, because then once those trees start growing in the spring, they're outside of that sort of rabbit and hare browse. But where there are deer and goats, we tailor a planting mix accordingly. So
yeah, nice. Thank you.
Yeah. And cost wise, so we're pretty transparent in terms of costs, so you can check on our website. We have a standard grade planting, that half litre that I talked about, $5 plus GST, gets a pre-spray supplied and planted, and then another 60 cents for a release spray. So you're sort of, it's $5.60 per plant. We take care of everything for that first year. You can put a larger grade in for an extra $1. So it gives people an idea of what they're spending, somewhere between, I'd say most of our projects are between 2,500 and 4,500 a hectare in terms of plants. So costs somewhere between 12,500 and 25,000. So, this is a good question for you, Aslan. Requirements for fencing. Do you guys have a specific requirement for the fencing? Does it have to be 5 wires? Does it have to be electric? Do you specify that?
It's with this, like a lot of things, it's about outcome. So that we're essentially looking for keeping stock away from the planting. How you achieve that is, and I'm kind of speaking, I'm not a farmer, but speaking on behalf of farmers, they know. Adam, working with nurseries, they'll have a good idea, as well. There's no specific requirements on that. The specific, other than stock cannot access the trees that are planted.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's really pragmatic. Generally, with if you get Waikato Regional Council funding, they'll specify 5-wire 2 electric for cattle, and a 7 or 8 wire batten fence if you're running sheep. And they have funding support for the fencing in addition to the planting. So that's probably just a bit of an idea. And it might be like, as I said before, stacking funding. Might find that actually for your project, council might be able to fund fencing and open country might be able to fund the plants. If there are some plants, like we said, those sort of grassier, sedgier plants that aren't covered under open country funding, might be able to get some funding from council for those. So you can kind of mix and match a little bit, and like I say, we're happy to help with that. But yeah, good to know in terms of open country's requirements, because that's the regional council ones as well. Cool. Oh well, looks like the only major question. Thank you, Kate. You made me feel like we were something extra to cover off. Okay, team. Well, thank you so much. We will send out a link to this webinar on video and some more on our YouTube, and we'll include that email address there so you can contact Aslan if needed, and that FAQ as well. So you've got a bit more detail around that. But yeah, both us here and Aslan and Devon out the back, we're all around to help. So if you've got any questions, just sing out. There's a QR code up there, which that's our plant range. Gosh, you guys are clever with the technology, not me. Devon and Annette are very good at that. Awesome. Okay, team. Well, you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and thank you very much, and we'll talk again soon.
Cheers, guys. See ya.